Last week, interestingly enough, we did a proclamation for our children, and today we're doing our proclamation for our seniors. So this is a proclamation, whereas Pickens County includes 3,814 citizens 60 and older. And it's changing every day. Whereas Pickens County Senior Services is committed to valuing all individuals and recognizing their ongoing life achievements. And whereas the older adults in Pickens County have an important role in sharing knowledge, wisdom, and understanding of the history of our community through interactions with children, youth, and adults from other generations. And whereas the older adults play an important role by continuing to contribute experience, knowledge, wisdom, and accomplishments. And whereas all our older adults are active community members involved in volunteering, mentorship, arts and culture, and civic engagement. And whereas recognizing the successes of community elders encourages their ongoing participation in future accomplishments. And whereas our community can provide opportunities to allow older citizens to continue to flourish by emphasizing the importance of elders and their leadership by publicly recognizing their continued achievements, presenting opportunities for older Americans to share their wisdom, experience, and skills, and recognizing that older adults as a valuable asset in strengthening American communities. Whereas Neil Batson has been named the 2013 Senior Volunteer of the Year, and John Kennedy has been named the 2013 Friend of Seniors for their outstanding service to the community. Now therefore be it proclaimed that the Board of County Commissioners of Pickens County of Colorado do hereby proclaim May 2013 to be Older Americans Month, and the 2013 theme is Unleash the Power of Age. We urge every citizen to take time this month to recognize older adults and the people who serve and support them as powerful and vital citizens who greatly contribute to our community. And our volunteers could not be here today, but Marty Ames, Director of Senior Services, will accept these proclamations, and if you wish, you can say a few words on their behalf.
Thank you, George. I am sorry they couldn't be here today, and of course, like all service-oriented entities like we are, we can't do it without the volunteers, and Neil and John both serve many roles in our programs as far as delivering home meals and assisting people in many ways, giving them rides, and they are two outstanding volunteers among about 300 volunteers who we use every year. As far as the theme of this year's Older Americans Month, Unleash the Power of Age, I would just like to say that my staff and I at Senior Services would be happy to help any business in the community or anyone in the community who would like to contribute or look for ways to use the power of older adults in the community to give us a call, and we'll help you try to find ways to do that.
Great. Well, thank you, Marty.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to public comments. Anybody here wishing to make a public comment that is not on today's agenda, you may come forward and identify yourself. Yes, sir?
Thank you kindly, Your Honor.
I don't know if there's an honor here. That's next door.
No, let your adversaries do that. I'm not your adversary. Okay?
No one is our adversaries in our community.
Now, you always have adversaries. Be realistic.
And you are?
MZVZ the Third. Anyway, folks, let's get to business real fast. I became aware and I was shocked. And what was I shocked about? The deputies don't have a pension plan. Now, I know I spoke about the police in Aspen first, but I found out about the deputies first. I didn't have a chance until now. Now, remember, the times have changed where we know what the different kinds of problems are with various kinds of pension programs. I would suggest that with your prudence, you could develop a program that would be beneficial to them and also to the community. Now, for some of you that are into European socialism, this is your chance to do something for Americans. Second, it came to my attention that you're treating one part of the community like it's a pariah. That's Woody Creek. Now, if you can help out Bambi and ants and bees and birds, well, people have priority as far as I'm concerned. Why don't we get the money somehow for a year-round bus into and out of Woody Creek? And have early, and at the same time, don't skip during the daytime where all of a sudden you don't have any bus service. You keep it going from early in the morning till late at night. Let's treat them as equals. All right? Now, the third one, and then I'll stop. And this one is about the airport. All right, now I did, with one of the business leaders that's in the community, it came up and I said my piece on it and he didn't care for it. But I have been doing research during the past year. And one of the things I found out, ski resorts pay the airlines to make sure that they have dependable service. Aspen's not doing it. And you have a lot of problems. Your business people are all stressed out. Your passengers are all angry, and you lose clientele, so you have to get up there and get mailing lists to get new clienteles. Why don't you, it's not payola, but pay to play. Chunk out the money so you have dependability. And stop all these headlines every year about the tension about, airline service. Look, thank you for listening to me. John, thank you. Don't worry, I'm thinking about Mesa County. I'll get back over there and take care of some business too. What happens is that I do appreciate your time. Your time is very valuable. And thank you very much for listening to me. But do work it out for the deputies. Do work it out for the people in Woody Creek. And let's not go with, how many people are riding the bus or whatever else. You just keep the service going. And thank you very much, and have a very nice day, and Happy New Year to all of you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else wishing to make a public comment that is not on today's agenda? Seeing none, I will close the public comment period and bring it back for board comments. Do you have any board comments? Steve?
We've all been watching the news about the massive tornado that struck in Oklahoma, and quite a few lives were lost, and a whole town was pretty much, a big portion of it was decimated. And I think if we can keep them all in our thoughts while we go about our business here. I know we've all gone through a lot of disaster kind of training, preparedness in case anything would ever happen here that, a disaster, and we think of a disaster here as probably being more like a wildfire that would encroach on areas where people are living, but different parts of the country have different disasters, and I watch how they react to it there, and then just imagine if anything similar to that would happen to us here. It would be gives me a lot of time to pause and think about that. So anyhow, I think keeping them in our thoughts would be appropriate right now.
Thank you, Steve. Anybody else? I will just mention that this coming Monday is Memorial Day, and along with barbecues and the ski mountain being open, and Independence Pass being open, and Maroon Road being open, we have a traditional a Memorial Day celebration right next door here at Veterans Park. And I believe it starts at 11 a.m. It's always a very moving ceremony. It starts out with Jeannie Walla singing the national anthem and then hearing stories from our veterans who have served in many different wars. So I would encourage everyone to stop by, listen to the ceremony, participate in the ceremony, and thank those who have served us and our country. We're going to move on to our consent action items.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, did we get additions, deletions?
No, we need
Do you have
to.
those?
Oh, thank you. Additions and deletions.
Thanks, George. We do not have additions or deletions, but I would like to recommend a change in order for the agenda. The first would be to take item 7 under consent public hearing, second readings, and move that to the last agenda item. And then to take land use actions and move that ahead in the agenda just after consent public hearing. That will put the two items dealing with Capitol Creek together. We have Commissioner Child recused himself from those items last time, and believe he'll recuse himself this time. That'll ensure that we, one, consider those together while he's out of the room, and that we're considering them in a timely manner while we have a quorum.
Okay, great.
And then one last item number 10 under consent public hearing, second readings. We should be pulling that for individual considerations. We have a slight adjustment to fund balance under the ambulance fund to talk to you about.
Okay, will do. Thank you. I should also just note that Commissioner Richards is attending the National Association of Counties conference on our behalf, so that's why she's not here today. She's out doing county business. So with that, we'll go back to our consent action items. The first are the minutes of the May 8th regular meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of May 8th, 2013.
Second?
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 The next is a resolution appointing citizen board members.
I'll make a motion for the approval of the citizen board members in the resolution.
I'll second that.
Second that, I just want to read those that we've just recently appointed and reappointed and thank them for their service. As Marty Ames said earlier, this community is run on volunteers, and certainly as our organization. So we thank all of our citizens for participating. Michelle Bonfils Thibault is renewal from our Planning and Zoning Board. Amirta Mallory is renewal from our Planning and Zoning Board. Hawk Greenway is renewal from our Open Space and Trails Board. And Christine Smith is a new alternate for our Translator Advisory Board. Okay, so with that, we've got a motion. We have a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. Okay, next we're going to move on to our consent action items. This is a first reading set for public hearing on June 12th, and it's a resolution amending the Translator Advisory Board bylaws. And Jody Smith is going to present this.
Thank you. Jody Smith, I'm the facilities manager, and we oversee the translator sites and the fund. Like you said, this is the first reading for the amending resolution for the bylaws for the Translator Advisory Board. Staff came to you guys back in February where we had a work session. We talked about some of the challenges that the board is having as far as allocating space on the system. We have a lot of requests, and at that time we talked about the role of the advisory board and what they were delegated their authority back in the 1980s. And at that time the commissioners asked us to go back and look at that and revise it, work on that with the county attorney's office to make it more in alignment with the Healthy River and Streams bylaws, which I did. Some of the changes that you see in our red line document that I provided as far as the Healthy River Streams and making those consistent was quorum voting and conflict of interest. So those were all changed. We also took your advice and changed the 4 items in there regarding the Board of County Commissioners' final decision. So that's been changed so that you, the board, have final decision that the TAB is now a recommending board. The second one is you asked us to make it a 7-board membership. According to the Home Rule Charter, we can't do that unless it goes to a vote. So instead, I worked that where it's a 5-member board with 2 alternates, and we worked on the residency alternatives for where they could live in the valley to kind of accommodate what the board was asking us to do. And then the last item was that the TAB members cannot consist of any employee from a radio station or a television station to help with that conflict of interest. But members of a board on those nonprofits can sit as a member. So we addressed all of that. I did provide you with the red line copy and a final version so you could see the cleaned up version. And that's it. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, any questions? Looks like you've done a great job. So thank you. We'll have this set again for public hearing on June 12th.
Thank you.
Should we make a motion to pass it?
Yeah.
First
Yes.
hearing, I'll make a motion to pass this resolution on first hearing.
Second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Great. Okay, we're going to move on to our consent public hearings. These are our second readings, and we spent some time at our last regular Board of County Commissioners meeting going over these, but if anybody wishes to pull any of these, just let me know. The first is an ordinance approving the Health and Human Services lease amendments. The second is an ordinance approving a 6-month rental policy for qualified owners who have retired. Next is a resolution approving a memorandum of agreement for cooperative frequency use between Pickens County and USDA Forest Service. Next will be an ordinance authorizing the execution of 2 amendments to agreements for on-airport rental car operators. Next will be an ordinance accepting a trail easement from Dan Bunta and Mary Manning. Next, which we've asked to pull, will be a resolution providing supplemental appropriations to the 2012 budget. And last will be an ordinance authorizing an amendment to the 2003 option contract for the purchase of a conservation easement from Capitol Creek Ranch.
We're moving that, aren't we?
We're moving that down to 10. We're going to pull it. You might as well do it separately.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion to approve items listed on our agenda as 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9.
I'll second that.
Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you all staff who came for these other ones. This is a public hearing, though. Anybody wishing to comment on any of these issues that we haven't pulled? Okay, so we will go on to now the resolution providing supplemental appropriations to 2012 budget's year end. John Redmond was going to present.
John Redmond, Finance Director. We're here for the second reading of a kind of fiscal year ending 2012 final cleanup. The change that we have and that we presented to you today is on page 4. If you go to the last page. Payment to Aspen Valley Hospital. Previously, in the far right column, the revised budget had been incorrectly carried forward as $46,000. The actual number is $334,538, which we've corrected and have distributed to you today. Otherwise, there's no other change.
So in essence, it is a Scribner's error in the original ordinance where the change we were seeking was listed as the final revised budget. And so this is just correcting that Scribner's error.
Okay, so the net increase or decrease
Is the same.
Is the
it's the same,
Yeah.
$46,000.
That's good.
That remains the same, okay.
We just wanted to bring that to yours and the public's attention.
Okay, anybody have any questions on that? Or any part of the other regular supplemental appropriations?
Just to refresh my memory on the ambulance, that was because they needed extra money because they had not anticipated the total cost. Is that correct?
Well, the way that we fund them, it's a net of their revenue and their expenditures. And what happened last year was that their actual revenues were down than what they thought they would be. So it means that the net number that we pay them is higher by this $46,000.
I'll make a motion for the approval of the resolution, Board of County Commissioners, Pitkin County, Colorado, providing supplemental appropriations to the 2012 budget year end.
Second.
Is this a public hearing? Anybody wishing to make a comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll bring back to the board. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 And that is as corrected or as amended?
No, because it's in our packet.
Oh, is the packet one okay? I didn't think
No.
so.
I don't know if the packet one was okay.
As amended. No, it's not correct.
It's not.
As amended.
As amended?
As amended.
Thank you.
That's fine.
Do you want this one to see?
Acceptable of everyone? Okay.
Yeah, he gave me.
Okay, thank you, John.
Thank you.
Okay, next will be the ordinance authorizing an amendment to 2003 option contract for the purchase of a conservation easement from Capitol Creek Ranch. And Dale will present this, and Steve Child, I presume, will excuse yourself.
Okay, I'll be upstairs, so you can come get me up there.
Thanks, George. We had a pretty good discussion of this at first reading, and I don't have Tim McFlynn with me today to make a rousing speech and commenting on this, but I do want to say for people that didn't hear that at the first reading that this conservation easement project was really an important one in the history of Pitkin County. It was the first time that the Community Development Department and the Open Space Department really got together to work hand in hand on putting together a master plan for an entire ranch. We later adopted a code provision called master plans for ranches, but this one was really the pioneering venture that set that in motion, and it wouldn't have happened without Bob Child and his views about land use, and of course that's an important part of the traditions in Pitkin County, so I'm happy to have been a part of it. It is also interesting it's coming back to us 10 years later as a result of having set up the transaction in a two-phased process where the second phase was put on ice for 10 years. And the reason that I'm asking you to approve this ordinance is to make some fairly minor changes to the agreement that was signed in 2002. Those are outlined in the memo, but briefly, there are three categories of things we wanted to talk about. The easiest probably is the closing date itself. June 15th, 2013 was set out as the absolute latest this project could close. Of course, as we're approaching it and we're seeing all the little details that you want to have done just right, we're requesting that you agree we can amend the option contract to postpone that if necessary to get this thing completely set. Secondly, the combination of the first conservation easement that closed back in 2003 and this option contract left a bit of a unanswered question regarding TDRs, and specifically what had happened is the first step of this included a conservation easement that reserved a backcountry cabin site, and then that conservation easement either extinguished certain TDRs or allocated those TDRs to the ranch, but it didn't specify what would happen if the ranch elected to extinguish that cabin site while they were still in ownership of the ranch. When we do close this thing, what we intend to do is restate the first conservation easement in a single deed with the second one that will be purchased and closed, and consequently we need to address what happens with that cabin site. The proposal on the table is that if we extinguish that cabin site, that would yield one extra TDR based on the totals that are outlined in the memo. And we discussed that at first reading as well. And then lastly, there are some fairly technical, non-substantive changes to the conservation easement itself. And this is for the north half of the ranch. The reason that I'm asking your permission to change an easement that hasn't been granted yet is because the original version was attached as an exhibit to this option contract. So because of the way that was all approved in 2002, we really can't change anything in it without going through this ordinance process. We discussed all the pieces in the easement. I won't go through them now unless you have questions about that. But I'm quite happy to be here recommending that you approve this, and I think that this project really set the tone for a lot of the ranch land conservation that we have been busily doing ever since.
Thanks, Dale. Questions for Dale? Michael?
What's the lot size of the cabin that's going to be extinguished in exchange for a TDR?
Well, there's a great question. The cabin site was reserved, would have been within a 35-acre piece of this overall ranch. Of course, the actual building envelope would have been a lot smaller than that. But
So it's a typical sort of rural remote size
yes.
lot?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other further questions? Okay, as Dale said, we had a pretty good briefing on this at first reading. Michael?
The only request, Alan, you know it's coming, is that I would like a map when we discuss these things, because we have one in our packet, but so much of these hearings are for the public purpose that if we can't inform the public where and the nature of the lot, then I think we're missing out on our public purpose. So.
Fair enough. Well, it looks
Good
like
point, and we'll want that map for the next discussion.
I
anyway.
have it, so I just didn't get it up in time for you.
as I mentioned, this project is the first of several where we combined land use approvals with a conservation easement, and the maps are the same on both, and the back-to-back timing of open space and ComDev here will facilitate this discussion. So if you'd like, I can just stay up here while we get the map on the screen, and we can edify anyone who's watching.
While you're doing that, just as an aside, I remember I'd asked ComDev to come back to us during a work session to talk about the acreage in terms of requirement for TDRs, because right now I believe it's at 20 acres, and there was some discussion that perhaps we should look at that. So just as a reminder, we should.
And I think just the 20 acres shows up in the CD, some of the CDPUD, I think, provision, and the some of the specialized, like the process, the limited development conservation, those provisions under the code. The normal rural remote deal is at 35 acres,
right,
unless you have a smaller legally created parcel.
Right.
So, but yes, point taken, but it's not, yeah. There are differences
Not relevant
when
to
that
this.
shows up, the 20-acre provision.
I made one small change to the ordinance. I was advised by one of the owners of Capitol Creek Ranch that Capitol Creek is spelled with an O. It is Capitol, not Capital, although there is plenty of Capital that seems to be finding its way into that valley.
And while we're waiting on this is a public hearing. Anybody wishing to make a comment on this agenda item? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing for these consent action items.
Maybe you can just put this on top if you want.
Well, I had a couple of maps, so we'll run through them all. I'm not very close. Okay, don't touch that.
Excuse me, George, were you going to vote on the open space item first, or just move both together?
Let's see, how's this written? It's just as one, it's just one ordinance.
Then pass the open space item.
No, there's two different action items. One is an ordinance to amend a contract, and the second is the land use item to amend the.
And that's why we moved the two of them
That will be the
together.
next discussion, so we'll do this one first. We're just doing this
You're talking about the land use.
to address the lot.
Yeah, that's the second one.
I suppose there's some utility in doing them side by side because the configuration of the lots that we want to authorize in the conservation easement is also what you'll be discussing here. So maybe the sensible way is to defer the vote on this and come
Okay,
back to
so,
it.
okay, unless there's any further questions on this ordinance. Michael, I think, wanted just some clarification in terms of the location of that lot where the TDR was going to be.
Well, just, it was really to have a map, so we're not talking about something we're looking at, and the public doesn't know exactly what we're talking about. So,
I'm happy to orient everyone. Whoops.
There we go. Sorry, just making sure.
So are we moving now to the land use action?
No.
I'm a little unclear here where we are.
No, we're still at this first ordinance. Dale's just going to utilize this map just to show us what he just presented to us.
Do you have a laser?
Okay, so here's the Capitol Creek Ranch, approximately 1,500 acres. I've seen different numbers popping up. I'm not sure what the final count is based on the surveys. It backs up on two of its legs to national forest land. Haystack Mountain sits back here. This area is the Snowmass Capital Valley, and
Zoom in. I can go to the next map, which brings you into the
okay,
property.
great. When we laid out this conservation project, the decision was made by everyone to protect the back half of the ranch. This is the interface with the national forest. It has more of a wilderness quality. Capitol Creek Trailhead, for example, is right here. So the goal was to keep the development down close to Capitol Creek Road. There's also another road through here called Nicholson Creek Road. So you can see that the majority of the acres of this ranch have been preserved with these home sites all clustered down around the edge, which is the best way to deal with a large property like this. So, you want to take it away? Or is that enough orientation?
yeah, that's great, Dale, I appreciate it, the effort. Now, don't we have to
Yeah.
make a motion for this ordinance?
Yes.
So I move we approve the ordinance authorizing amendment to the 2002 option contract for the purchase of a conservation easement from Capitol Creek Ranch.
Second.
Second, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, now we're going to move on to our land use action item, and this is a Capitol Creek Ranch Company minor amendment to the BOCC resolution number 190-2002 and special review GMQS exemption for caretaker dwelling units, and Suzanne Wolf will present this.
And if you don't mind maybe taking the lights down again for just a couple of minutes, then I'll walk through this map and then a closer up of the envelopes. So I think you have all the background information. But so what we're dealing with today, in terms of the amendments, as you said, Dale, here's the south conservation easement. This is the north conservation easement. The north side includes these approved building sites. And we're amending some of the envelopes there, driveways, tweaking some of the specifics of the approval that was granted back in 2002. And I think it's easier to then bring you in closer on all of that. Actually, the one thing I want to point out, just in terms of the difference in terms of how the lots are configured from the way they were before, I did include in your packet an 8.5 by 11 map that showed the original lotting. I didn't put that up here, but just for comparison, if you look at this area that's within this white line, which is the portion of the property that's zoned RS30, the 7 35-acre parcels were all located within this area. That was what was originally contemplated, and then with an activity envelope for a residence on each of those parcels. What they're now proposing is to change some of the boundaries of those parcels, and a number of the parcels get smaller over here. And then one parcel, parcel 4, which is the parcel that includes the child family house and the what they call the grandmother's house. Those two houses are on parcel 4. Parcel 4 now picks up the remainder of the ranch. So I can't see the numbers there because my eyes aren't good enough, but I think it was about 1,200 acres approximately that becomes all part of parcel 4. And then the other parcel that changes in size is parcel 6, becomes about 120 acres. That is the parcel where Steve and Molly Child's residence is. And the idea is that they would then retain some acreage and irrigated areas where they could continue to ranch on this parcel. And the other parcels would be up for sale. And then the idea about attaching, I think, the majority of the ranch to parcel 4. Previously, there were 7 35-acre parcels and then a remainder parcel, which was the rest of the ranch. And I think the thought was that we need to attach it to something. There was no provision at the time for a common parcel or a homeowners association taking care of it. That just really wasn't addressed in the original approvals. So this was seen as a way to connect it to a parcel such that whoever bought that would then they would own the ranch, and that would be part of that one parcel. So, and the other parcels would be smaller in size. So then moving in closer to show you the envelopes within those various lots. As I said, there are 7 sites, 7 envelopes were established. We're not changing the location of any of those envelopes. They're asking to expand the size of those envelopes to deal with what we currently require under the code, which is that all development occur within your activity envelope. The envelopes were originally about 1 acre apiece. They've asked to expand those to 2 acres. They would still ensure that all of the residential development and buildings would be within a 1 acre area within that envelope. And essentially that additional acre would provide them some flexibility related to location of the septic system and the well. But otherwise, any development associated with a residence and any other buildings on the property would be within a 1 acre area within that activity envelope. So again, we're looking at the same locations originally contemplated, but looking for a little more area to provide some flexibility for the development associated with a residence on each lot. One of the requests is to relocate the driveway to parcel 3. This is the proposed driveway. The original driveway came off somewhere in here and kind of skirted around the edge of this irrigated pasture over here. And when they looked more closely at it, there is a sort of a cut. You come up here, but they're able to meet the provisions of the code related to the 30% slope in there. And obviously, it's a much shorter distance, and this way there's no impact on this irrigated pasture here. So it's definitely a preferable location for that driveway. They've asked to establish an underground activity envelope between parcels 4 and 5 for a water line. That's this little envelope right here. And that's in the event that the well for parcel 4 is then shared with development on parcel 5. That may or may not be the case, but if it is, this would accommodate the extension of that line. As Dale talked about, one of the requests is to eliminate the allowance to develop a cabin, basically a rural remote cabin, in that south conservation easement area. To your question, Michael, a parcel was never designated for that. I think the idea definitely, as Dale said, was that at that time they could create a 35-acre parcel around it. It was calculated in terms of, based on the original number of TDRs they were issued, one was not counted for a TDR because it was a development right that was going to be used. So basically that development right is now being converted into a TDR with the elimination of the provision for that cabin. They'd asked to amend the square footage allowed on each parcel for agricultural buildings. Let me get to that point in my memo. They had originally gotten approval for 3,000 square feet of ag buildings on each parcel, each of the 7 parcels, so a total of 21,000 square feet of agricultural buildings on the property. There was no provision made for existing ag buildings. There are some existing buildings on parcel 4 and a couple of very small ag buildings on parcel 6. And the total square footage for those are 4,290 square feet. That was 4,290 square feet on parcel 4, 182 square feet on parcel 6. They've asked to change those numbers and basically to reduce the amount of agricultural square footage on parcels 1, 2, 3, 5, and 7 to 2,000 square feet. And they've asked to allow the square footage, a total square footage on parcel 4 of 7,500 square feet for ag buildings. That would include the 4,290 of existing buildings, so they would be allowed an additional 3,210. On parcel 6, they've asked for a total of 6,000 square feet, so that would include the 182 existing and an additional 5,818 square feet. So that would allow a total of 23,500 square feet for ag buildings, including the existing buildings. There's basically a reduction in the square footage of new ag buildings from 21,000 to approximately 19,000. And looking back in terms of, not addressing the existing buildings at the time, the code that was in effect then would not have counted those existing buildings towards an agricultural building allotment. The code today does, but looking in terms of what might have been not stated, but what were we thinking at the time, we probably were thinking those buildings would not count and that the total amount of new buildings they would get would be the 21,000 square feet. So actually there is overall with this proposal a reduction in the total amount of agricultural buildings out there because they're reducing it to a smaller size on all of what are now the smaller lots. So that's the proposal related to ag buildings. Those are all the changes that have been requested, and then they've also requested approval for an attached caretaker dwelling unit on each of the parcels and for a detached unit on parcel 4. Right now there's this grandmother's residence on parcel 4, and they've basically said either that would serve as a caretaker unit, a detached caretaker unit on the parcel, or potentially somebody could tear that down and build a new caretaker unit on the parcel. But so each parcel would have the potential for a caretaker dwelling unit. And let me see, I think that takes you through all of the changes. We're supporting them. We've recommended approval. Subject to conditions, I did talk to Doug Pratt and Jody Edwards, and we have a couple of minor language changes in the conditions that I can present to you when you're ready for that.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions. So back on these, on the ag allowances, the number could have been total 23,500, but now it's being reduced to about 19. Did you say?
So the total of, the current total would be 20. So I guess let me what was approved previously was 21,000, but that didn't account for the existing buildings. So it was actually 21,000 plus approximately 4,400 of existing buildings. So it was really more like 25,000 square feet, including the existing buildings. So when you look at that number and what they're proposing now, there is a slight reduction in the total square footage.
So we're still not including the existing buildings as part of the overall?
We are. So the 23,000 includes those existing buildings. And those existing buildings are then captured in the totals for parcels 4 and 6.
Okay.
So they're not getting 7,500 square feet of new buildings on parcel 4. They're actually getting 3,000 square feet of new buildings. And they have existing buildings which could be replaced.
Okay. And then on the residential homes, are they restricted to a certain square footage, or are they eligible for TDR?
They are restricted to 5,000 square feet, with no potential to increase the size.
And then that would also, and then if those who want to use an attached care dwelling unit, which allows about 1,000 square feet, so that goes on top of the...
No, it counts towards the 5,000
square feet. It counts towards the 5,000?
Yes.
Okay. So 5,000 max, which would include...
Which would include the caretaker dwelling
unit. Whether it's attached or unattached?
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions at this point for Suzanne? Can I turn the lights back on for right now? Unless Doug is going to use this map for...
No, if we need to reference them, we can, but...
Okay. So we'll hear from Doug. You just want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Doug Pratt. I'm with the Land Studio, and I have been working with Capitol Creek Ranch as a planner to prepare the BOCC resolution amendment application and the special review and growth management exemption for the caretaker dwelling units. Jeannie Child is here from Capitol Creek Ranch, and Jody Edwards, an attorney, is here who has been working with us in this process. We've all simultaneously been working with Dale on the conservation easement side to make sure everything's dovetailed together. Obviously, as applicants, we support staff's decision. I don't have a big presentation to make, but can certainly answer questions. As Suzanne said, the reason this was, I guess I would call these more refinements than amendments to the original resolution that was put forward. The refinements include dealing with utilities in an underground fashion, having some room to separate wells and septic, make sure that we have enough room on each of the building envelopes to do that. Also to provide for some changed access to one of the parcels to create less impact on some of the ag land and provide a utility easement to connect some shared wells. So I've worked pretty extensively to do an inventory of all the ag structures and floor areas related to existing structures with Capitol Creek Ranch and the Child family, and thus we've kind of incorporated all of that into this analysis of ag structures and some refinement to the conservation easement related to that. For the most part, Suzanne's done a very good job outlining this. If you have any questions for us, we had a couple of very minor revisions to conditions of approval that we kind of talked with Suzanne about. She can talk about those later when you get to that point.
Okay. Suzanne?
One thing I know I forwarded to you, but just for the record, the Snowmass Capitol Creek Caucus did meet this week and provided comments supporting the proposed amendments. So I think, did you get a copy of that? Okay, I'll make sure you get a copy.
So, Suzanne, why don't you just go over some of those
the changes,
some of those changes, and we can open up for board questions.
Condition number 4 on page 3.
This is under the resolution?
In the resolution, yes.
3. Under the recitals or on?
No, it's on page 3 of the resolution, which
what page is that?
Page 9 of the packet.
Oh, okay.
That helps.
Okay.
The very first sentence where it says all of the lots should say each of the lots shall be limited to a maximum of 5,000 square feet. That would be the only change from all to each. And then another change in condition number 6, same page. Second sentence partially says the existing grandmother's house on parcel 4 may be used as the detached CDU on that parcel. Basically, would propose to add some language saying, or a new unit may be built to replace the grandmother's house. Just to make clear, my intent there by saying may be used as the CDU was that it also could be replaced, but we just would like to add some language to make that more specific. And actually, based on what we were just discussing about the square footage of the CDU counting towards the 5,000 square feet, I think we should also add language that makes that specific as well. So that the CDU shall count towards the 5,000 square feet of floor area allowed on each parcel.
Okay.
Those were the only changes.
Okay, great, thank you. Any questions for Suzanne or Doug? This is a public hearing. Anybody wishing to make a comment on this? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board.
Make a motion to approve the resolution of the Board of County Commissioners, Pickens County, Colorado, approving the Capitol Creek Ranch amendments to Board of County Commissioners Resolution number 190-2002, granting special review approvals and GMQS exemption for caretaker dwelling units as amended today.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll do one more quick bit of business, and then we'll take a short break and bring Doug back down. This will be under the land use consent public hearings. This is the PT Ranch Barn LLC / 1892 Castle Creek LLC / PT Ranch House LLC activity envelope and site plan review for river restoration. This is to be renoticed for a date to be determined.
Right, no action is required. Essentially, it's being withdrawn, but since it was an advertised public hearing, it's still on the agenda, but they have more work to do and have agreed to not proceed until they come back with an amended application that we will renotice for you.
Okay, this is a public hearing. Maybe we should make a comment on this? Seeing none, we'll keep the public hearing open for this next item as well. So we need a motion for this?
No.
We don't, okay. The next land use consent public hearing is a Tie Bar Trail open space subdivision exemption to create an open space parcel. And this is to be continued to, do we need a date certain for this?
Yes, I would suggest June 26th. Is that a Wednesday? Did I count properly?
Should be back there.
June 26th is a Wednesday.
That's the date.
Fourth Wednesday.
I'll make a motion to continue this to June 26th.
Second.
This is a public hearing. Anybody wishing to comment on this? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Any further board discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great, thank you. So we'll take a short break here while we set up for the next land use public hearing.
You take 5 or?
10-minute break?
10-minute break.
Okay, we're on to our land use public hearings. And on the agenda is the Deadwood Ranch. 1, LLC amendments to the BOCC resolution number 059-2010, and special review for ranch manager's unit. Susanna Wolf will present.
Okay. First, just a location map for you. Sorry, you might want to bring the lights down to see that a little better. So the Deadwood Branch was formerly known as the Middle Ranch, just to bring everybody up to speed. The new owner has changed the name of it. So the blue outline here is the property. Here's West Sopers Creek Road, and the intersection up here with Sopers Creek Road and East Sopers, so you're coming up here. Sopers Mountain Ranch borders the property over here. BLM property over here. And then the Stone Road lots are up in here. So just to kind of orient you. I guess while we've got this up, just to show you, there's currently an existing access road that comes up right here. There's a little ranch road, basically, that comes up on the east side of the creek. There's, if you're familiar, there's I always call it the house in the rock that's on this side of the road. It's accessed off of this driveway, and then the road continues on up into the ranch. The historic buildings are located approximately in this area on the property, and I think that's it. Oh, I guess actually, sorry, we'll keep going. The new driveway is coming in
There you
here.
go. Yep.
If anyone's been up that way recently, you'll see that there's a new bridge across the creek, and they're bringing the driveway up this hillside, and you'll see that alignment on the maps we've got. So we were going to get rid of this screen and show you some maps on the board behind, unless there are any questions on this.
Is this, and this might be a question for Willie, is this what was known as the Turlamus place at one point in time?
Well, it was Teresa's and Turlamus was used on Silver's
You want to introduce yourself for the record, please, if you're speaking?
My name is Willie Fender. At one time, I believe the Turlamuses owned the surrounding property, the Strangs Ranch, which now is Silver's Mountain Ranch, and they also owned what is now Stone Road. But I think it was John or Joe Cerise owned the Deadwood Ranch.
Okay.
I don't think Turlamus is.
So it's not the Turlamus, okay.
No.
And I think these Stone Road area was always referred to, was priorly referred to as the Turliamus Tracks. So I guess I don't know.
Any other questions on this map at this point? Bring it up there.
If I just turn that off, get rid of that and that. Okay, now we probably need lights again.
Comes with the chair.
So there were lots of prior approvals on this, but I think the most pertinent was the CD/PUD rezoning of the property a few years ago, and the approval of a CD/PUD plan on the property. And that laid out how many, they could build 2 single-family residences, 2 caretaker dwelling units, 19,960 square feet of barn floor area, and dealt with other issues, including the issuance of TDRs off of the property due to the rezoning to CD/PUD. And anyway, so that's the basic approvals. There was an amendment to that done last year, which really related mainly to the historic buildings and how those were to be counted towards floor area or not, and the use of them. And so that was spelled out in that 2012 amendment. So now we have the next amendment, that's what I'm calling the 2013 amendment, where they've got some changes to really how the ranch functions, and they'll probably talk more about it. But Willie Fender is here because he is now the ranch manager for the property. And as I understand it, he came in and looked at the plan they had and said, this really doesn't make sense if you want to operate this as a ranch, is the short version of that. And I'll stop there, and they can fill in more on that. But anyway, so that's really where I think these amendments have come from, trying to make this more functional for its use as a ranch. So again, so then putting this site plan on the left in the perspective with the map you were just looking at, again, here's West Soapers Creek Road. Here's that new driveway coming up the hillside. And I don't know if it would help. Mitch actually has some colored plans showing the previously approved plan in envelopes and the new plan. Would it help if we put those out on the table for you to see the comparison?
Sure.
Why not? It might make it easier to walk through those and see them.
Should I do that? Back them up if you want. But
Is this easy enough, or would you prefer if we put them up
I
on
think
the...
it's better if we tack them up.
Okay.
Okay. Let me come on. That's below the book and page is the existing recorded page plan. I just colored it in so you can more easily read what's going on there.
So just quickly, I guess, on the plan on the right, which is the previously approved and recorded plan. Here's the driveway coming up from West Soapers Creek Road. The driveway then continues on, well, now these are turned around, so that would be the west side. Is that right? I have to get my direction.
That's
Yeah.
heading south.
Yeah. So the driveway continues. So the old road, existing ranch road, is over here. Historic buildings in here. The new road was stayed on this side, the other side of the creek, continued up here to an agricultural facilities envelope. It crossed over Monique's Gulch, which runs through here. Continued on up here. This is one of the irrigated pastures. So continued through that pasture, crosses over Dry Creek in here, and then climbs up to the primary building envelope. So you had a primary building envelope, ag facilities envelope, historic envelope, and this envelope down here was just a spoils envelope. So when they were doing work, they would have a place to spoil the dirt from the site. So the proposed plan continues with the same driveway coming across West Soapers Creek, climbing up to here. Here's that spoils envelope area. They're actually proposing to expand that. They would still use a portion of that for spoils, but they were designating that for agricultural facilities as well, down in here. So and then from that envelope, the driveway would at this point cross over Dry Creek and head over towards the historic buildings. So rather than continuing again up the other side of the creek and through the pastures, it would cross the creek here, pass through the envelope where the historic buildings are located, and then it would climb up this hillside till it gets to the primary envelope. This in here, these areas would be designated for agricultural facilities. This agricultural facilities envelope is eliminated. So basically this plan takes disturbance out of this irrigated pasture. There's no more road, there's no more envelope. The ag facilities envelopes are clustered in here and down at this lower end of the property. In addition, they've proposed envelopes for ponds, as you can see. There are ponds down in here, ponds along Monique's Gulch, and then ponds along adjacent to Dry Creek up in here. So that gives you, I think, a pretty good picture of those changes. So I guess to walk through the various pieces on the amendments, the first one about realigning the driveway. As you've seen, obviously, it avoids then the impacts on the irrigated areas. It also, the driveway would have crossed Monique's Gulch and Dry Creek. This was to be culverted. I think this was there a bridge up in here? But basically two crossings of streams. With this driveway alignment, there's only one crossing. And they've picked an area where they can basically do it with the least impact possible. The creek would be culverted under the driveway, and it would come across to that existing road, which would be used through this area. So we reduced the number of creek crossings and the associated impacts. There is a small, there would be some impact in here, obviously, on the riparian area to culvert that. The code does permit that. If there's no alternative, and adverse impacts will be mitigated. In this case, I think the impacts can definitely be mitigated, and this is clearly an improvement over the impacts that were anticipated from the previous plan, with the impacts on Monique's Gulch as well as up Dry Creek farther up. The proposed driveway does primarily avoid slopes in excess of 30%. There are some areas once it crosses over in here where the existing driveway doesn't meet the currently required 16-foot width, so there would be a little bit of additional cutting into the side slope there to meet the width requirements, and a few other minor places that meet the sort of minor anomaly provisions of the code. So it is in compliance with the provisions, primarily being on slopes of less than 30% with a few small areas of impact. Most of the realigned driveway is not visible from West Soapers Creek Road. Obviously, the most visible portion is what's already been built, and there's no change proposed to that. Once we get up in here, there may be places, farther up West Soapers Creek Road as you're coming down that you might catch a glimpse of this, but you'd probably have to work to see that. And obviously, through the permitting process, there would be revegetation and whatnot to try and minimize any visual impact of that. There's a lot of support for this amendment of moving the driveway, as well as most of the other amendments. Bill Harding has reviewed this and finds the realigned access acceptable. The neighbors support it. Soapers Mountain Ranch, AVLT, and Open Space and Trails support this relocation of the driveway. So anyway, I think people see this as definitely a positive in terms of preserving the ranch and the open areas and those irrigated areas. For the agricultural facilities envelopes that are proposed, again, they're eliminating the previously approved envelope, and again, they're allowed 19,000 something square feet of ag buildings. Their thought is that by breaking up these envelopes into two smaller envelopes, they're not anticipating, they would like to break up the square footage of the buildings. I think is the maximum size 6,000? Any one building can't be bigger than something? I don't.
For agriculture?
Agriculture, was there something that limited?
No?
Oh, maybe not.
Just 19.
Okay, so they just have a total square footage. So anyway, the idea here is that they would be breaking up that square footage more into these envelopes and not having it all out here in that agricultural envelope. Again, these are supported by the neighbors. There was an issue raised by Open Space and Trails and AVLT based on the conservation easement about the number of envelopes allowed and the total square footage of those envelopes. This plan that Mitch put up reflects the changes that have been made to address those concerns. So as you can see, the way it was shown on the previous plan, there were a couple of agricultural buildings envelopes in here and the historic envelope. And they've basically combined that into one envelope. They have one envelope here for the primary envelope, and then one envelope down here for structures. So that met their requirements, and they were able to reduce the size to meet that request as well. So this plan reflects the amendments needed to comply with the easement. And if you have any questions about that, Paul Solsinger from Open Space is here. The envelopes otherwise comply with the code. Slopes of less than 30%, low wildfire, they comply with the 100-foot setback and avoid any other constrained areas. And just to be clear, site plan review will be required for any development within these envelopes, which is consistent with the previous approval. So this is just establishing envelopes for structures in those envelopes. Historic cabin relocation. Actually, if you could, underneath here, there's the plan that shows the new location of the larger cabin. If you remember from that previous amendment, there are two cabins. One was referred to conveniently as the larger cabin and the other as the smaller cabin. And it's the larger cabin we're talking about relocating. Right now, this is the new location, which is easiest to see. The old location, the existing location of the larger cabin is here, and then the smaller cabin, again, is somewhere over in this location.
Yeah, you're right.
So, and the road is coming through here. So the proposal is to move this cabin, which, were any of you, have you all been out on the site? I was going to say, we did a site visit at some point on this.
We did.
But Rob wasn't.
Rob or Steve was.
Okay,
Right.
so I don't know if there were any pictures in here. So the little cabin on this side is intact and usable. We went in and had water and snacks, I think. This other cabin has been falling down and is kind of sinking into a hole right here at the toe of this slope. So given that, they came up with the proposal to, since they were going to have to pick it up in order to restore it, that it would make more sense to pick it up and slide it 60 feet over this way in order to get it out of this basically depression where it sits now. And it's clearly been part of why it has deteriorated as it has, because all of the water that's coming off of that steep slope directly behind the cabin is then pooling up in this area and has affected the integrity of that cabin. So they've asked to slide it over 60 feet this way, which would put it would maintain its same orientation to the road, would be situated similarly. It does provide a little broader area behind the cabin, so it's not right at the toe of that slope, and would require less retaining behind the cabin. And it would be able, as part of this, they'll bring it up to the level of the driveway. Right now, it's, again, kind of sitting in a hole that's lower than the driveway. So Susanna Reed, our Historic Preservation Officer, has reviewed this request, and in her comments, she's pretty clear. She said, you know, we look at requests to relocate things very carefully, and she thinks that the circumstances in this case are beneficial to, you know, the preservation of this cabin, that it is only a slight relocation, it maintains its same orientation, it does actually bring it slightly closer to this other cabin, so there's a bit more of a relationship between the two, but she sees this as beneficial to the cabin, to the historic resource and its preservation, so she supported that relocation of the cabin. Just a quick note about the stream setback here. The existing cabin is, I think, entirely within the 100-foot setback, and existing cabin. And the new cabin will be partially out of the setback, but still partially within it. So we've addressed the requirements related to a non-conforming structure. So let's see, the setback from the high water line increases from approximately 60 feet to 80 feet. So they are able through this move to move it farther back from the stream and more into compliance with the code. And in terms of the provisions related to the modifications to a non-conforming structure, essentially the issue is obviously there's a steep slope behind here. To push it farther back just pushes it into the steep area of the property, and also then, you know, does affect more the historic orientation of the cabin. So by doing this, it does come more into conformance, but basically they're dealing with the practicalities of the site and obviously the historic integrity. So we found that it complies with those provisions.
Michael?
Sorry.
Suzanne, did we have a time frame for the restoration and preservation of the cabin?
Yes, we do. Do you know off the top of your head?
It's actually going on right now and going to be finished by the end of the summer, but
I think
well in advance of the established deadline.
It was based on the sale of TDRs, the timing, and they had 2 years from the point where they'd sold X number of TDRs, and I believe the deadline then falls into 2014. But they are underway on that now, so they will.
December of 2013.
2003, okay. It's coming up.
That was Max Phyllis, for the record.
But they had initially, there was a stabilization requirement that had been met, and then the next requirement was within a certain time of the sale of a number of TDRs. The cabins had to be restored. I'm sorry, I didn't bring the specifics, but yeah, Max Phyllis is the contractor on the project. So he's probably most familiar in his head about when that has to be done at this point. Continue. Okay, the next issue is the request for activity envelopes for ponds. As you saw, they're proposing 9 ponds in 3 separate clusters, and then an additional potential for a small pond up by the residences at some point. Let's see, the primary use of the ponds is water, irrigation storage, and water rights augmentation storage. Ancillary functions including creek restoration, wetland riparian and wildlife habitat enhancement, and recreation. They did provide a list of their water rights with the application that was provided to you. And the pond envelopes, are located on slopes of less than 30% primarily. They do meet the provisions of the codes related to anomalies. There are some areas that are steeper, but mostly due to erosion around the creeks. The idea with this is to actually improve the habitat along those creeks as part of this, and do some definitely more extensive plannings to try and make this more of a wetland and riparian area along the creeks, which would be these 2 clusters. These ponds are really more purely utilitarian for irrigation purposes and are not located along one of the water bodies. Let's see, they are within the 100-foot riparian and wetland buffer along Dry Creek and Monique's Gulch. That is permitted by the code. There's an exception for irrigation devices, water diversion facilities, culverts, flood control structures. So it does allow for the ponds within that setback area. So I think that's it on the ponds. And the last issue is the request for a ranch manager's residence that is listed as a special review use under the CDPUD zone district under option 2, which was the commercial development option that they utilized for their approval. One note from the 2012 amendment, basically the code allows up to 3,000 square feet for special review uses. And that was discussed related to the historic buildings, and it was agreed that the size, the net livable area of the larger cabin would be deducted from the 3,000 square feet. So it leaves approximately, 2,150? It's about 850 square feet that will be deducted from that. So what remains is slightly over 2,000 square feet that is available for them to use for the ranch manager's unit, or, in theory, other special review uses they might come back for. So it's their decision, I guess, at this point to decide how much of that they want to use for this residence. The CDPUD zone district specifies that special review uses must be consistent with agricultural operations and support the continuation of those agricultural operations. And we found that this agricultural housing is obviously consistent with that. And otherwise consistent with the various criteria in terms of consistency with the EMMA master plan and supporting agricultural use, not diminishing agricultural and conservation values of the parcel, consistent with the intent of the CDPUD zone district, and allows for somebody to be on site to manage the property, and reduces trips with people coming in to manage the site. So we found that it complies with the applicable criteria in the code. And I think that's it. We've recommended approval, subject to conditions.
Thanks. I'll start with a couple of questions. On the new ag site within the spoils, will that area be visible from West Cypress or from Stone Road?
Probably everything on this property is visible from Stone Road.
From Stone Road, because you're looking straight across.
Our issue would only be, under the code, would only be from West Cypress Creek Road. They'll have to go through site plan review to determine if this is visible. Again, the code wouldn't say, we've talked about, I think way back when in the approvals, our concern had been that when they originally wanted an envelope up here, that was clearly going to be very visible. That's why this envelope was moved down in here. I think it's possible that none of this, would be visible. I don't know that I can, I haven't looked at height poles or anything on the property at this point. That would be looked at.
So at site plan review, then that would be an opportunity for the neighbors to make comments as well, because
correct.
Without actually seeing it, they may say this is a great plan now, but if they're looking at a huge structure, they may have some other thoughts or concerns.
Yeah, that will be site plan review. Our standard, will be publicly noticed, referred out, obviously, to the caucus. So it will go through another process once they have buildings designed for these envelopes.
Okay. And then when we're moving the historic cabin up a little bit, one of the agreements under the original approval, which I think carried over, was the ability to have that available for occasional visits by community members, schools, so they would access that from the new driveway going up there?
Yes.
Okay. This may be a question for John E. I had an opportunity to talk to the water commissioner a few weeks ago, and he was mentioning his concern about the ongoing proliferation of these ponds and the loss of the water through evaporation. Do you have any comments on that? Or?
Well, I know that the construction of smaller ponds like these are an issue for Bill Blakesley, the water commissioner in this area, and he does provide comments on that type of activity on a regular basis. One of his principal concerns is that in the adjudication of structures like this through the water court, that they be fitted essentially with a drain, such that if they're called out, that they can be released, the water can be released. The process for adjudicating these rights will go through the division engineer's office, and the water commissioner and the engineer himself will be making comments there. It's an interesting issue, and to be honest with you, it's come up on other property recently, and it's an issue I think that would be a discussion for the board. But right now, where we are sitting, it's an issue within the jurisdiction of the water court, and as a county, we have not gotten in a position of denying the ability to construct ponds that are used for potentially firefighting purposes or agricultural irrigation purposes. The utility of the ponds, the ability to fill them, is something that will work its way through the water court in due course.
Okay, and then I guess maybe a question for Mitch at some point, you could address it, but I didn't look at all the agreements in terms of the water rights, but I know there was some disagreement with the previous owner and Silver's Mountain Ranch in terms of water rights and use of those rights. So that's again something that the water court would be looking very closely at.
Well, the court would look at it to the extent that an opposition is filed, for example, by Silver's Mountain Ranch, to make sure or ensure that their position isn't affected. But their priority to divert water and to utilize it is preserved anyway by virtue of their own adjudication. And to the extent that the previous owner and Silver's Mountain Ranch may have had a dispute, that's the kind of thing that can be resolved with, Mr. Blakesley's help, quite frankly. So.
All right, thanks. Rob?
And it certainly relates to the ponds, but what, if anything, has been done in terms of wildlife studies of how this change affects the area of the activities of the wildlife in the area, and how the ponds affect the activity of the wildlife in the area too?
I don't know if studies been specifically done on that. I mean, there were extensive studies done previously regarding the need to sort of improve, the creek and the habitat along the creek. I think this goes beyond sort of the restoration improvements that were previously discussed. But I mean, the only wildlife study, I guess, that's included at this point was Dawn Barton, who reviewed this for AVLT. I don't remember if she spoke specifically to the ponds.
She did. The ponds, she kind of more globally addressed everything.
Yeah.
I think, right, I think her report was more specific towards the movement of the envelopes and preserving those open irrigated areas. But right now, I mean, this, the creek itself is, has been impacted over the years by use. To what extent does it need restoration? I guess that has not been specifically addressed by anybody from a wildlife perspective.
Michael?
What's the surface area combined of the ponds?
I think it was 6 something. 6. Cumulative total pond surface area is 6.59 acres.
6.5, what was it?
6.59 acres.
6.59 acres. Steve?
Two questions. One on the water rights. I presume the augmentation ponds would be put in place, I presume, to account for evaporation off the ponds, and also if the water is called for, would the augmentation ponds be the first ones drained? Would that be true, John? Or
Typically speaking, I'm not sure what the overall plan is for water use. The full slate of potential uses that the stored water could be put to is rather large, and I think Suzanne hinted on that on the beginning of her presentation. But but ultimately trying to maintain the property in a functional position, and to then have a water resource that would enhance the irrigation of the historically irrigated area. More than likely, the higher ponds would be suited for an application onto the property, and the lower pond would be used for any type of augmentation from evaporation loss or transit loss or anything else along those lines.
With all that, the water court will be the ones to sort that out first.
Yeah, the water court has the jurisdiction to determine the use and potential impact to or injury to any other water rights holder.
Okay. And question on the road, the new road going up the hill to the primary building envelope, is that an existing ranch road that would just be improved, or would that be a completely new road?
It's mostly a new road. There is an existing road, but it kind of goes straight up. And definitely doesn't meet any of our standards.
Is that a line, a really thin line, we can see the existing road?
In here? Does
Yeah.
that, Mitch, does that represent anything existing?
There's
or?
several existing roads up there. I don't know that you can really make any out in this. At this. At
I
that
just
scale.
Well, just looking on Google Earth, and it seemed like there were some.
There's definitely some
little
existing stuff, but like,
roads going here and there.
definitely this
We
part
are-
where you come up from the historic buildings,
Yeah.
it just goes straight up the hill.
We did our best to follow existing alignments as best we could, and pick up existing road alignments where we could, but there was no way to fully use them. They're way too steep. And
So that road is one that meets the code and.
correct, that one's.
The fire truck access and all of that.
Right, right.
Okay.
That was after several versions that weren't meeting the code. We finally found one that did, and that Bill Harding could be happy with too, Bill being the fire marshal.
Okay.
Other questions for Suzanne at this point? We could always come back, so we have a presentation from the applicant, and if you just want to introduce yourself for the record.
Yes, I'm Mitch Haas, and also with me are Max Phyllis of Divide Creek Builders and Willie Fender. Max is the contractor overseeing everything going on the property, and Willie's now the ranch manager, and as you know, one of the former owners of this property when it was the Fender Middle Ranch. Suzanne covered most of what's proposed. I'm going to try to just give you some background as to why we're doing all of this and going through this effort. A lot of things converged at one time that really told us this was what we needed to do with this property. The previous owner was an investment banker, didn't have much knowledge about ranching properties. Was really just trying to, apparently in hindsight, I know now, I didn't then, trying to set up something that was most sellable. Then the new owner came in, who's also not a rancher, as an attorney, but has had the foresight to hire someone who knows how to ranch and ranch this property specifically. I met Willie, loved Willie's insight into the property, his knowledge about how everything here works, and they immediately saw eye to eye, and Willie's now the ranch manager, which then led to Willie saying, the plans don't really work for ranching this property, for irrigation, for actually, grazing the properties, for everything needed to make an efficient ranch operation here. So Willie started suggesting alternative ways that things may be able to happen to make ranching here a lot easier and more viable. And right around the same time, our next door neighbors, the Smiths, who live right around here, am I in the right spot? Yeah, live right around here in Soapers Mountain Ranch, had also approached the new owner, Jerry Parker, asking if there's anything he could do to change a lot about this plan. The road coming all the way up to almost to them and then back through, crossing the creek right in front of them and back through, and then this 3.6, almost 3.7 acre agricultural envelope, all of which really made one of the main irrigated pastures of the property almost useless. So they had approached Jerry. Willie was also at the same time suggesting that this plan is something of a mess for continued operation of this property. And we said, all right, well, let's take this opportunity to see what, if anything, we can do to make the neighbors happier and make this property workable as a ranch going forward. So that began with a lot of studies. First thing we had Sopris engineers go out and do is stake the existing road alignment so everybody could see it, stake the existing agricultural facilities envelope, which the approvals allow for close to 20,000 square feet of structure just right here in the middle of that meadow. 19,900 something, I think, of agricultural buildings. Stake that envelope, and then it became real obvious to everybody, yeah, we do have a problem here with where everything, once you could see it on the ground. So then we had Sopris start working on, okay, well, if we don't want to have the road come all the way across here, across the creek for a second time back there, and wind its way back up, then where can it go to still get to this envelope? And then so the initial thought, and which ended up being one of the part of the final iteration, was let's get back over here and use the existing ranch road through the existing old historic improvements, and then try to tie in with the ranch roads that already head up this hill and get back to the envelope that way. Many efforts went through, many different road alignments for one reason or another failed, till we arrived at this one, which we think works both scenically, works with the slopes, works for fire and emergency access, and really does a much better job of staying out of all of the irrigated meadows. So instead of cutting this meadow into two pieces, with the areas behind it in front of it, and then needing possibly to fence off and things like that to keep cattle and whatnot off of the roads, eliminated. Essentially the road is the same from the bottom up to right about here. So on both plans that doesn't change. And then found that instead of cutting across this meadow and then across this gulch and having to culvert it, it was best to find what was essentially a bottleneck in the mapped riparian areas. So a spot where the riparian areas come to a real narrow spot and don't have any wetlands associated with them in that area. We're able to find a good place to cross and get back on the alignment of the existing or historic ranch road. And by doing that, we're able to leave both of these meadows intact. And then at the same time, the idea of all of the agricultural buildings being in the center of the property, when this is one of the main meadows, this is the another, and then this is the third, all of the ranch operations having to come back and forth out of this spot seemed inefficient and something of an eyesore to many of the neighbors to have all of these buildings occurring right in the middle of one of the nicest, most scenic open meadows of the property. So we said, all right, we have 3.6 something acres of agricultural envelope. Let's not add any more, but use that same acreage and break it up into pieces. We neglected to notice the part of the conservation easement about a number of envelopes, thinking it was more important that the acreage stay the same and that they move to places that are better for the conservation values of the property. Then we got the comments back from AVLT and Open Space and Trails saying we need the number of envelopes to stay the same. So this is slightly different than what was originally submitted. Rather than a bunch of different smaller envelopes occurring right in here, it's one envelope that ties in with the historic envelope. So at the end of the day, we still have 1, 2, and 3 envelopes, whereas that's what we had here, 1, 2, and 3. And the same acreage of these 3, just now broken up differently. And so as part of the amendment, we looking for agricultural buildings being right along the road up to the house and next to, adjacent to this meadow, and near the historic buildings, and agricultural buildings right when you enter the property along and adjacent to that road, but on the very corner of this meadow. So we're able to leave 2 meadows alone and 1 improve upon its condition on the third one. So this envelope now becomes, let's see, some of this envelope won't get used. We're aware of that, but We wanted to make it one single envelope that will be for the historic structures and some of the agricultural buildings. This one is for primary residential buildings, and some agricultural buildings can go in there as well. And then this is for ranch managers' residence and agricultural buildings here. So rather than close to 20,000 square feet of structures in one central place in the middle of a meadow, where the idea is to break it up, separate the massing less, and move it to areas that are less impactful on many ways, not just for the ranching, but according to AVLT's review and Don Barton's review, better for all kinds of conservation values, open space, scenic, wildlife, you name it. So once we had this stuff figured out, where to put the road and what we were talking about for envelopes, we didn't want to rush into a process, but rather went the next step of talking with every neighbor that would be interested in doing so, which is why this application came in with a letter from the Smiths supporting it, a letter from Cypress Mountain Ranch supporting the application, a letter from Aspen Valley Land Trust supporting it, and a letter from their wildlife biologist Don Barton supporting this. And then before we submitted, we also went and met with the Emma Caucus and presented the plans to them, and seemed to be well received. And they didn't want to commit at that date, but we've since gotten a written memo that doesn't have anything negative to say about anything here. So that's we consider that support. So far so good. Everybody's in line, and then we've been doing our best to make sure all involved parties are happy with this. We're trying to get a win-win-win situation where the owner's happy, the county's happy, and all other parties are happy, being the Aspen Valley Land Trust, Open Space and Trails, the Emma Caucus, and our immediate neighbors. So when we heard that AVLT and Open Space and Trails were concerned that we were going from 3 envelopes to more than 3, and we had inadvertently had 9/10 of an acre added in that happened at the last moment when we were tweaking the historic envelope to accommodate the relocation. We quickly said, okay, we're not going to argue with anyone, we'll make the adjustments. So we now have the 3 envelopes. We eliminated those 9/10 of an acre to have the exact same acreage in the proposed as in the approved. And I won't put words in it, but as I understand it, everybody's happy with this plan now. The relocation of the historic cabin just came up in terms of doing the stabilization work, noticing what a mess the cabin had become because everything on that hillside drains to right under that cabin. It was undercutting the cabin itself. It was creating pools, puddles around it. The cabin's been stabilized, but it's still sitting above these pools of water. And it looks, for some reason on the plans, when you look at it, yeah, it looks like a pretty significant move, and it's 60 feet. When you stand there on the ground and you see the flags of the relocation site, you say, oh, it's right there. I mean, it's almost right next to it. We were all, I think, surprised to see just how marginal a difference it really seemed to be on the ground, but does a good deal for the immediate restoration of the cabin and then long-term maintenance and preservation of it. It will be able to drain better. It won't keep having the same issues occurring or reoccurring. Less retaining, as Suzanne mentioned. It actually maintains the same historic orientation to the road, and instead of sitting a few feet below the surface of the driveway, it'll sit right at the same level, so that it's not in a hole and you're not looking down on the cabin, but you're at eye level with it. And it happens to increase its proximity and hopefully its relationship with the other cabin. Instead of being over here and over here, they're kind of right across from each other now. A little diagonal cross, if you will. So at the end of the day, for us, it seems, we really have tried to make a plan that is functional, first and foremost, and secondly, works for all involved parties on the property and around the property. And I think we've achieved that. The ponds element are Suzanne said primarily water storage and irrigation ponds. They will also serve ancillary functions. I mean, aesthetically they'll be pleasing. Design Workshop has been working on their design of these ponds, and they will be landscaped appropriately, native species. We'll introduce quite a bit of new wetland areas. There will be little islands introduced in the ponds that are beneficial for birds and other wildlife species. And then, so they'll also serve some recreational, aesthetic, wildlife purposes, but primarily water storage and irrigation ponds. And then the ones on the bottom were purely augmentation needs. Will they be in the exact layout we're showing? We can't say that just yet, but the general idea is there. These ponds will serve a good deal of stream restoration function as well. The banks up in this area have been overgrazed in the past and damaged, and the construction of these ponds will first help with that, and then the plantings around them will help to restore whatever residual damage might still be there. This gulch can't really serve much in the way of irrigation purposes anyway, the way it sits, the topography of it. But will now serve irrigation purposes by having water storage and be convenient for use and serving of ditches and laterals. Willie's probably the best person to speak to how all of that will function. So I don't know what else there really is to add to what we've done other than, we've done our homework, and we think this time we're hitting the nail on the head for all the purposes of a CDPUD, for conservation purposes, for agricultural purposes, for preservation purposes of the land. I think this one really is a vast improvement over what's already approved and can be built in many ways. And I don't know if maybe, now would be the time, Max, or...
No, I'll run the meeting.
Okay. Well, I figured applicant's presentation.
They will. Are you done with that?
The only other thing to add is we have no issues with the staff recommendation. We have no concerns with the conditions of approval as drafted. We're not asking to change anything.
Okay, thank you. Questions for the applicant? Questions for Mitch? Steve?
I'm thinking about the agricultural operation, and I mean, I like the general look of the plan. Not putting a big barn in the middle of the irrigated meadow is a really great start, but as I recall, I think the fenders used to graze all this. Is that right, Willie?
Correct.
And because you had really good hay fields down below, are you anticipating possibly haying this ground up here, or would it still be just grazing
yes,
land?
Probably Willie Fender. Anybody? Somebody have a clicker? This we plan on is the best hay ground. It's good level ground. Probably put a side roll along here. Depending on the ponds in here, that's some hay ground. Where the manager's lot in the barn were proposed, that's good flat ground. There's so probably from this line all the way would be hay ground. Out of the 93 acres, there's probably 40 of it that we could hay, and the rest we would pasture as we have pastured. George, to address your question of Stone Road and the visibility of the proposed manager's house, that 19,000 square foot barn, that was what my main concern was Stone Road. When I stood there at that barn site and looked, that's all you could see was the house, 8 houses at Stone Road. We're going to look at this 19,000 square foot structure that just took up way too much agricultural space. So I am the one that threw the wrench in the whole approved particle. And then, let me see your clicker here. Not only does our proposed road, this is also about 2 acres of wetlands in here that will no longer be affected at all. The small strip of riparian is almost legible compared to what would have been destroyed with the approved road. The approved road, as Mitch touched on, we would probably have to, this is the approved road, we would probably have to fence both sides of it, thus making it harder for the wildlife to cross. We'd have to put bar ditches on both sides with culvert probably every 30 feet, which would increase more erosion. And it's just a better idea for the land. Any other questions?
Well, we sort of jumped the gun with you, but you don't go far. I was asking questions for Mitch, for the applicant. So if we don't have any others, at this point, I'll open it. It is a public hearing. I'll open it up for anyone wishing to make any public comments, which could include those in the back, if you want to add anything.
I think I've added what. Oh, well, my proposed site was, if you look up at the residential site, and then where the road curves over, there, we're showing where I originally was gonna move the ag site. No, there, somewhere there. And we were at a meeting going, okay, we're disturbing the spoil site, why not take the atrocity of the barn, divide up some square footage and move the managers and some agricultural buildings at an already disturbed site?
Okay, thank you.
Right, and we also knew up here was an issue for the original proposed building envelope. It just became too visible and too high up, so moving things down. Hopefully it's okay. I neglected to answer or respond at all to George's earlier question about the water rights in Cypress Mountain Ranch, and I meant to. The previous owner had issues, and when I think they even had some litigation with Cypress Mountain Ranch. As I understand, that's all been resolved. The current owner, Jerry Parker, is getting along real well with everybody at Cypress Mountain Ranch, and a large part of that has been about discussions about water rights and making sure nobody steps on each other's toes, so to speak. So as I understand, everybody's in agreement right now on the water rights and who has what and who doesn't have what. And that's been, these ponds don't even use all of the water rights, as I understand it. We just can't. There's just not enough acreage and permitting necessity and water court to try to use all of the water rights in ponds. So these are storing as much as is reasonably practicable on this property and what would actually serve the irrigation needs of the property. The rest will just continue the way it does and flow without storage parts.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments? So, be ready to look at a motion. Michael?
George and myself and Rachel visited this site. Steve and Bob haven't. Maybe we should have a site visit. The commissioners who haven't seen this.
If it's deemed necessary or if there's an interest to do that. Steve?
I think I'm willing to go by recommendations of the Open Space and Trails and Aspen Valley Land Trust. Just looking at the plan, these all look like improvements to me over what was previously approved. I think it'd be better for the riparian area, it's better for the irrigated meadows. I'm not necessarily happy with the location of ponds in existing hay meadow for those augmentation ponds, but in general the proposed changes are an improvement on what was previously approved, and the square footage and all that is all the same. We're not like substantially changing anything from the previous application, aside from making improvements in the location of things. And I personally wouldn't feel like I needed a site visit to verify these things, because other people that I trust their opinion have already verified those things.
You'd be surprised how detailed you can get on Google Maps these days. And we've got the site plan review requirement for the building envelopes anyway, when things come up in terms of making sure the visual planes are not being obstructed and that sort of stuff. I'm real happy with the changes here. I think the cutting up of those meadows is a tremendous disadvantage for the conservation of this property long-term. You know, it's a little unfortunate with the slopes that you have to S-shape up that hill a little bit, but the additions of the ponds and stuff, I think it's a great, well-thought-out plan.
Okay. Michael? Yeah, interestingly enough, I don't know if you read it, but Tony Wagner had a column this last week, and the subject was ponds.
Good one.
And I'll just read the last portion of it. Some of it, I'm not sure you'd want to read on air, but he takes a dim view of ponds. And when he said people used to fit in with the landscape. Now today, some try to change the landscape to fit in with their view of reality. We didn't have a pond, he means the Wagners. And most people would have thought that building one would be an egregious desecration of the natural landscape, an abuse of scarce water availability. So that's one view of ponds, and I come close to that view, at least man-made ponds. One of the problems with ponds, seems like a good idea, and I suppose from an irrigation point of view it might be a good idea, but they tend to be thermal sinks, and so you tend to heat up the water, and then when you introduce that water back into streams, of course you've changed the water temperature, and you've changed the nature of water flowing downstreams. So they're a bad idea from that point of view. And they tend to collect whatever waste or herbicides or whatever that you put on fields, and they tend to concentrate in those areas. So, and then now we have 6 acres of thermal sink as far as I'm concerned. So I don't think it's a particularly good idea, but that's the newest and best idea for this property. And the last time we were presented, the last idea, the previous idea, which has now been discredited, was the best idea that could have come up. So I'm a little discouraged by how many good ideas come in front of us on the same property. That being said, I guess I'll take the best idea today and see what happens to it in future days.
Steve?
I largely agree with you, Michael, on your view towards ponds. I kind of take Bill Blakesley's view towards ponds, that one pond, well situated, could serve for irrigation purposes, for water for fire protection, for pond for ducks to land on, some wildlife benefits. Having 9 different ponds on a property is, and if it were my property, I would do 1 good pond and not 9 ponds that were smaller. I think that would be better for having less evaporation and all sorts of benefits like that. But this is the applicant's project, and since the water right thing has to go through the water court, I think we could make our approval for the location of the ponds contingent upon approval of the water court in some fashion.
It may be the applicant's project, but it's up to our discretion whether we approve it or not.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that both of those are all good comments, and that's why I first started that question. And I see Willie's hand, but I'll recognize you in a second. My concern is that these ponds are not only going to be agricultural, but it's going to be an amenity for the homeowner, for the ranch owner, because they want to have some water to look at. They will probably have some nice landscaping, and who knows, there may be some waterfall features down the line. So it's going to be an amenity that will be used by the household beyond just its agricultural use that I think Steve speaks to specifically. So I would like to see whether there's an ability for us to revisit the ponds, the locations, the actual use, and see whether we can make it yet even better. As Michael says, I've seen many renditions of this over the years, and each one has gotten better, but all these ponds over 6 acres, that's a lot of water. So that would be my concern as well. I see Willie's hand up. I don't know if you want to address that particular point, Willie.
Well, it is about the ponds. We do have the legal right to store 96 acre feet, and that's, there's no, you'd have to have a pond as big as Dingle Lake down here. So we've done away with some of our storage rights to accommodate the pond size. Michael, the reason the ponds there in the middle are where they are is because it's in a natural drainage that occurs through there. And I agree with, I'm on board with you about ponds, and I thought Tony's article was a very good article. But as being a private property owner, if you have the water, you should, I think, it's not only a scenic thing, it's more for irrigation and fire protection. I mean, it is a somewhat secluded property, and if you have source of water, as we found out when Mark Kister burned his slash pile about 10 years ago, it's nice to have some water around.
Can I briefly add to the pond? The way they're designed, yeah, this is 3 ponds, but functionally it's one pond system. It just, because of the way the regulation, the same thing with these 3, one pond system. The way as I've been learning, listening to all the conversations with the water engineers and everybody else involved in these things, the way the regulations work, you can't have more than a 10-foot dam or you're into a horrific process to get your ponds enabled and then built. So while instead of one large pond and a dam that would probably be more than 25 feet in height, the way to achieve the same function and in doing so even better for wildlife, because you can have some flow and some aeration and whatnot in between them, is to break it up into smaller ponds where no one would be more than 10 feet of dam on the downhill side, and is a lot simpler a process and more a process that you can rely upon actually turning out an approval at the end from the various regulatory agencies involved to be able to build. So we honestly look at this as one pond just broken up into 3 parts. Same thing here. And then that's, again, what's happening with the augmentation ponds. It largely just comes down to the regulations tell you not to do one big one, essentially, to break it up into pieces. And then, so yeah, of course they'll be beautiful at the end of the day. It's a beautiful property and, not trying to create big piles of mud. They'll be beautiful, not just for the owner of this property, but all the neighbors on this side in Cypress Mountain Ranch are going to appreciate that beauty as well, as opposed to a 20,000 square foot building sitting in the middle of it.
Okay. I saw your hand up. Did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I was pretty much, Max Phillips again, I was pretty much going to comment just the way Mitch did on those. Not only is it tough to be able to build those ponds as a 1 or 2 larger ponds, but it also wouldn't have fit in well with the natural environment we decided. But this really went best with the topography. If we had one really flat meadow, it may have made more sense to get as much storage in one large pond where we could pretty much just dig a hole in the middle of the field. This, we've got a lot of side hills, so we tried to use those gulches as best as possible. And with cascading ponds, we could get that storage, but it had to be separated up so that we didn't have that big dam, as Mitch was saying. So we looked at it from a bunch of different options, and we thought this was really the best way to get the most water storage possible for irrigation purposes without devastating the land and making it look, nobody wants to drive up there and see a huge dam site from any angle.
Thank you. Okay, I think at this point I'm going to close the public hearing and just bring it back to the board. Are we stuck here? Or?
I'm just looking at the topography lines on where the pond sites are, and there is, I don't know what the gap is in between the different lines, but there is quite a bit of drop where in the location of the ponds. So I would agree with you, Mitch, on, you know, what the height of the dam would be for one pond versus several smaller ponds.
Anybody want to throw out a motion?
I will. I'll throw out a motion to approve the resolution, Board of County Commissioners, Pickens County, Colorado, approving the Deadwood Ranch 1 LLC amendments to BOCC Resolution number 059-2010, Middle Ranch CD PUD Plan.
Do I have a second?
I don't know how to do this parliamentary procedure, but would you accept, I'd like to have an amendment that would refer to approval of the ponds pending outcome of the water court proceedings.
Now, I understand that you want that amendment, but maybe a question for John. I'm assuming the ponds are contingent on the approval of the water court anyway. So it's not really adding anything.
Maybe it's not.
That's true.
So the water court, if they turn it down, the ponds will be there.
You know, I guess, are you thinking about a situation where the hole is approved but not the water to fill it? I guess.
Oh, I'm thinking of the situation where the water court turns them down and they build the ponds anyhow because we approved the ponds.
I would think that situation would be highly unlikely, simply because, well, the water commissioner is going to be aware of what's going on, and if there's storage that's not approved, I mean, it's kind of hard to miss. And the jurisdiction for the use of that water lies with the water court. The jurisdiction for the use of the land is with us. So I guess I would state that, you know, Rob is right. Inclusion of that type of a condition is fine. At the end of the day, it might not add a lot because of anything that's going to have to happen is going to be reviewed by the engineer's office, essentially, anyway.
Just on that point, I mean, we do have a standard condition in the resolution 6A does ask for documentation of adequate water rights with the earth-moving permit for the ponds. So we are, you know, that is standard that we ask for that with the permit application. So
okay.
I think that addresses your concern.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, further discussion? Michael?
Yeah, I stated it before, that we've gone through various iterations on this. We've arrived at the best plan, according to the planner, who, Mitch, you were the planner for the last best plan, I think, weren't you?
We'll say this is the best to date.
Yeah. So I'm a little, and I don't know whether I'm just jaded from being a commissioner, or I'm just disappointed that this ranch has gone through all these iterations with the best possible plan each time. And although I'll support it, my support will be with those comments in mind. But, I guess my desire would be that this would be the last best redevelopment, at least in the next 4 years. So.
We sure hope so, too.
Yeah, and I will say that it has improved from the previous owner, who I think was trying to pull the wool over our eyes, frankly. And that's one reason why his original proposal had 9 wells, although he blatantly said that he was not going to have 9 home sites. I don't think the previous board really believed that. And then we were able to come up with, I think the first time the CDPUD plan was utilized. So that previous owner jumped on that. I think it was more of a opportunity for him to get out with some dollars into TDRs as part of that approval process. But I'm actually very pleased with the new owner's interest in hiring a qualified ranch manager to look at how this land should really be managed, not as a subdivision, but as a ranch, as a ranch that could preserve the rural agricultural history of this part of the valley. So I'm really pleased with that. And there's always a few little things that I would like better. And I think when it comes down to those actual site plans, we'll have an opportunity to revisit some of these issues and have the neighbors still be able to participate. So if there's any surprises, they won't be caught unaware. So I'm going to support that. So with that, there's no further comments. I will call the question. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Understanding coming from, I too felt like the wool was somewhat pulled over my eyes because I was surprised as anyone else to all of a sudden see it on the market and changing hands and, you know, what went on.
Okay, we are on to our, we're still in the meeting here, Paul. Paul, we're still in the meeting, so if you guys want to carry your conversation outside, that'll be fine. We're on to our open discussion. John?
I don't have any additional items from yesterday.
Okay, any open, Steve?
2 different things, and one John and I discussed when we had our meeting today. I was at the Democratic Party meeting the other evening, and there is, on May 29th, there is like a climate change awareness day that's happening, I guess, nationwide, and Blanco Leary is planning to have an event revolving around the Thompson Divide gas drilling question, and she was going to find a location in Aspen and invite Zane Kessler and people from Thompson Divide to come do a presentation up here in Aspen. And she was envisioning it being, you know, something, an opportunity for people from Aspen to be able to find out about the issues similar to what the meeting in Carbondale was. John and I talked about, first of all, it's very short notice that there's been next to no planning put into the thing, but she was thinking maybe that the county commissioners would want to participate in the event. John and I talked about it is a Democratic Party thing, and we feel like a nonpartisan kind of event would be something more that the county commissioners would want to participate in the event. And also that if it were planned a little bit further ahead of time than on 1 week's notice. So at this point, I don't know if the event is going to still be held or what. I'd have to talk to Blanca about that, but I wanted to toss the idea out and just get, so for your awareness about it and to get feedback from the rest of the board.
So it sounds like that she's been talking to Zane at the Thompson Divide Coalition in terms of putting together and sponsoring that event, which is great, and it would certainly be open and available to the public as well as any commissioners who want to attend. If you're asking whether we should be actually sponsoring an event up here at a certain time, similar to the one in Carbondale, we could throw that open to the board discussion.
So what are you asking, Steve?
Well, I just wanted to put it out there and get.
Are you
Your
asking if
opinion.
we should do an event?
Well, that
or
was-
we should be invited to the event? That's what I'm trying to be clear. I'm not really clear
Yeah,
what your.
it was kind of vague at the meeting, like she put it out there first, well, maybe the county commissioners would want to co-sponsor the event,
I
or,
guess my suggestion would be to communicate with her to make her request less vague before coming to us, because I don't know how to respond.
Or, yeah.
I just
or-
don't.
Right, or perhaps have her work with Zane, and Zane can work with John or Chris and see whether there's a time and if we want to do a venue up here similar to Carbondale. Sort of get Blanca a little out of the loop on this, and, because the main character should be probably TDC and probably the county.
yeah, my personal thought, I thought maybe it should be put off, not just have it 1 week away, but put it off, there's an Eco Fest happening in early June, and that could give a little more planning time. And I realize any of us could participate in that. She envisioned it really being Thompson Divide, Zane Kessler and maybe people he picked to do the presentation was more the way it's envisioned to happen, but I wish that's all the information I really have on it, and it's not like a really well-planned event at this point, but it is something that might be happening in a week's time.
Well, that's great. I mean, if they want to move ahead and let the public know, as they say, it will be open to the public and any commissioners, of course, as a public, we're happy to attend if it's available. But if you want to do something more formal, working with Zane, I think would be the way to do that and see what his vision is of, or the outcome that he would like to see having an event up here. When we had our event at Carbondale, we had a specific reason and outcome, and that was to generate awareness and interest, to encourage citizens to write the BLM, the Forest Service, and elected officials regarding the suspension. BLM's already made that decision. We are appealing it now. There's still an opportunity for citizens to write, of course, and we will always continue to encourage them to do that.
Okay.
So we'll see where that goes, I guess.
I had one other thing. I don't think it's premature to talk about it. It's really a non-issue for the commissioners right now. About a phone call I had earlier today, but it's not anything that we need to even discuss. So.
Okay. Anybody else have anything for open discussion? Seeing none, I would accept the motion to adjourn.
Make a motion. I'll second it.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, grassroots.